The alien soldiers filled the great hall, their tall frames covered in shining armor, their voices echoing with pride. They were the strongest species in the galaxy, feared by all others. In every war, they marched to the front with confidence, believing no force could match their strength. Yet, one thing always confused them. Whenever humans joined, they always stayed behind, sitting quietly at the back. To the aliens, this looked like cowardice. They laughed at humans, whispering that they were weak. To them, humans were just shadows in the back rows, never daring to take the front seat, but whispers of war spread across the galaxy. A new enemy, fierce and relentless, had risen from the dark corners of space. This enemy was not like the others. They were fast, brutal, and unafraid to die. The galaxy's strongest species prepared for battle, eager to prove their might once again. They laughed and said humans would probably hide in the back as usual. Yet the humans said nothing. They simply watched, their eyes sharp, their silence deep. The aliens did not understand this silence, and they never tried to. When the war began, the strongest aliens rushed forward. Their fleets filled the skies, their armies landed on worlds with thunder. The humans were placed at the rear, as always. The aliens called it a safe place, but really, they meant it as an insult. They believed humans were too weak to stand in the front lines. Humans accepted it calmly, without argument. They sat in the shadows, waiting and watching, while the strongest species roared in the light. The first battles were brutal. The enemy struck with a power the aliens had not expected. Their warships tore through defenses. Their warriors fought with terrifying fury. The strongest species fought hard, but slowly, cracks began to show. Their pride made them reckless. They fought to be seen, to prove strength, but they did not see the traps the enemy had set. The humans, sitting far back, saw everything. Their eyes followed every move, their minds noting every mistake. They stayed quiet, letting the war unfold like a story only they could read. Days turned into weeks, and the war dragged on. The strongest aliens lost more soldiers than they had in centuries. Their generals grew frustrated, their pride wounded. They shouted louder, fought harder, but nothing changed. Meanwhile, the humans remained in the back. They trained quietly, shared whispers with each other, and made notes the aliens never bothered to ask about. To anyone watching, they looked useless. But to themselves, they were preparing for something no one else could see. Then, on a cold night in the command ship, the aliens argued about strategy. The room was loud with voices of anger and fear. None of them noticed the humans sitting silently in the corner, listening. They never asked the humans for advice, because in their pride, they believed humans had nothing to give. Yet the humans were gathering every detail, building a map of the war inside their minds. They knew the aliens were failing. They knew the enemy's next move. They knew the storm was about to break. The humans stayed quiet, because the time had not come yet. They knew the back was the safest place, not because they were weak, but because it allowed them to see what others could not. While the galaxy's strongest fought to show their power, humans fought to understand the truth. And when the truth became clear, they would no longer sit in the back. They would stand, and the galaxy would never forget it. The battlefield was chaos. Explosions ripped through the skies, fire and smoke painted the ground, and the proud alien warriors shouted as they clashed with the enemy. The strongest species had charged forward with confidence, certain of victory. They wanted to prove to the galaxy, once again, that no force could match them. But the enemy was different. They moved like shadows, striking with speed and precision. They did not fear death, and that made them dangerous. The strongest species, who had always believed in power alone, suddenly found themselves struggling against an enemy they could not predict. The humans, as always, were at the back. They sat in the safer zones of the battlefield, away from the front lines. To the aliens, this only proved what they already thought, that humans were too weak for real combat. Let them sit. The alien commanders sneered. When the war is over, they will thank us for saving their fragile lives. But the humans did not answer. They watched, listened, and waited. They knew the war was not decided by the first roar of strength. It was decided by the one who understood the fight better. As the first waves of battle raged on, the aliens pushed forward recklessly. Their ships advanced without formation, their soldiers charged without strategy. They fought with pride, but not with patience. The enemy noticed this. They let the aliens rush forward, then cut them down with deadly traps. Entire fleets of the strongest species fell in minutes. Their soldiers, though fearless, were crushed under the enemy's endless waves. The cries of the fallen echoed across the stars, and the proud warriors of the galaxy tasted fear for the first time in centuries. In the back, the humans studied every detail. They mapped the enemy's movements, counted their patterns, and measured their speed. They noticed what the aliens could not. The enemy repeated certain tactics, circling back, striking from the same blind spots again and again. While the strongest species fought loudly, the humans learned quietly. The difference was small at first, but with every passing hour, it grew larger. One side grew weaker, the other side grew wiser. At night, when the battle paused, the alien generals gathered in their command ships. Their voices rose in anger. They shouted at each other, blaming one another for the losses. Pride filled the room, but not wisdom. And still, in the corner, the humans sat quietly. They were not asked for their thoughts. To the generals, humans were unimportant, barely worth noticing. Yet, while the strongest shouted, the humans whispered among themselves, sharing the truths they had seen. They were planning, even if no one else knew it. The second day of the war was worse. The enemy struck harder, and the strongest species bled more. Their once perfect armies began to break. Fear spread through their ranks, though they refused to admit it. They still called themselves the strongest, but their eyes showed doubt. Their bodies showed weakness. And in the middle of this storm, the humans remained calm. They did not panic. They did not rush. They waited for the right moment, as if they already knew it was coming. Finally, it happened. During a massive attack, the aliens were pushed back farther than ever before. Their leaders fell one by one, their lines shattered. The enemy advanced, with fire and fury, believing victory was certain. The battlefield was a storm of destruction, and the strongest species seemed ready to fall. It was at that moment, when all hope seemed lost, that the humans finally stood. They did not shout. They did not boast. They simply moved. Small groups of humans slipped into the battlefield with quiet steps, carrying weapons the aliens had never seen before. Their faces were calm, their eyes sharp. The enemy laughed at first, thinking the humans were easy prey. But the humans did not fight like the others. They moved with discipline, striking only where it mattered. Their attacks were precise, like blades cutting through the dark. Where the aliens had fallen, the humans held their ground. The strongest species watched in shock. They had mocked humans for always sitting in the back. But now, they saw something they had never imagined. Humans were not weak. They were not cowards. They were patient hunters who waited for the right time to strike. Every move was measured. Every shot was planned. The enemy, who had crushed the strongest species, now began to stumble against the humans' sudden and focused assault. The war was not won yet. The enemy was still powerful, and the battlefield was still burning. But something had changed. For the first time, the strongest aliens felt a strange emotion toward humans, not mockery, not pity, but respect. They began to wonder why humans always sat in the back. And though the answer was not yet clear, a shadow of truth began to form in their minds. Humans did not sit in the back because they were afraid. They sat in the back because they knew something the others did not. The first strike had been made. The humans had entered the war, and nothing would ever be the same again. The battlefield had changed. Where once the strongest aliens had roared with pride, now they stood in silence, staring at the humans who had finally entered the fight. The humans did not march in shining armor. They did not carry banners of glory. They simply moved with quiet precision, their steps steady, their eyes sharp. Each strike they made was deliberate. Each decision was exact. The enemy that had broken the strongest aliens was now beginning to hesitate. For the first time, the enemy saw humans, not as shadows in the back, but as a force to be feared. The strongest aliens could not believe what they were seeing. They had always mocked humans for sitting at the rear. They thought humans avoided the fight out of weakness. Yet here they were, holding the line where the mighty had fallen. How? One alien soldier whispered, his voice trembling. They were supposed to be nothing. But his words were swallowed by the sight before him. Humans moved in small units, each one covering the other, their weapons firing in perfect rhythm. They did not waste energy. They did not chase glory. They fought only to win. The enemy charged again, their monstrous forms rushing forward with fire and steel. The strongest aliens braced, but the humans did not flinch. Instead, they let the enemy come closer, closer, until the perfect moment arrived. Then they struck not with wild fury, but with deadly accuracy. Enemy after enemy fell, their advance cut apart by sharp human timing. It was not strength that broke them. It was patience. The humans had studied them long enough to know exactly when and where to strike. Watching from the sidelines, the alien commanders felt shame. They had thrown themselves into battle without thought, without caution. They had fought loudly, proudly, and recklessly, and they had paid for it. Humans, on the other hand, had sat in silence, gathering every piece of knowledge, waiting until the right moment. They had turned patience into a weapon sharper than any blade. The aliens began to understand. Sitting in the back was not fear, was strategy. One alien general, wounded and bitter, turned to a human officer. "Why did you wait?" he demanded. His voice was heavy with anger, but also with confusion. The human only looked at him calmly. "Because waiting shows you the truth," the human answered. "And truth wins wars." The general had no reply. His pride had no answer to such simple words. For the first time in his life, he felt small. The days that followed only deepened the lesson. The humans continued to fight with a style that was unlike anything the strongest aliens had ever seen. They did not rush. They did not waste lives. They adapted quickly, changing tactics every time the enemy tried something new. They were like water shifting, flowing, and filling every gap. The enemy grew frustrated. They had broken the galaxy's mightiest warriors, but against the humans, their reckless fury seemed useless. Around the campfires at night, alien soldiers whispered to each other. "They are not weak," one said. "They are dangerous." Another replied, "Maybe that is why they always sit in the back. They see what we do not." The whispers spread, until even the proud commanders could no longer deny it. The truth was too clear. Humans were not cowards. They were hunters who waited for the right moment to strike. They did not need to be in the front to prove their strength. Their strength was in patience, in silence, in the hidden power that no one expected. The enemy soon realized it too. They began to avoid human squads, targeting the strongest aliens instead. But even then, humans stepped forward, not to boast, but to protect. Slowly, the war was changing. The strongest species no longer led the charge. They began to follow the humans, watching them, learning from them. Pride was replaced with caution, and caution turned into respect. The galaxy's strongest had been humbled, and it was by the very ones they had mocked. One night, after a long battle, an alien captain sat beside a human soldier. The captain's armor was cracked, his voice tired. "Tell me," he asked quietly, "why do you choose the back seat every time? Why not stand in front with pride, like we do?" The human smiled faintly, his eyes distant. "Because pride blinds you," he said. "But from the back, nothing is hidden. We see the truth before it comes." The alien captain sat in silence, his heart heavy with the weight of those words. He finally understood what his people had never seen. The hidden strength of humans was not in their weapons, not in their numbers, but in their patience. They waited while others rushed. They studied while others shouted. They planned while others fought blindly. And when the moment came, they struck with a force that could shake even the strongest race in the galaxy. The back was not a place. of weakness. It was the place of wisdom, of sight, of control. The war was far from over, but one truth had already been carved into the minds of all who fought. Humans were not the shadows in the back. They were the storm that waited to rise. And when they rose, the galaxy trembled. The war dragged on, and the galaxy's strongest species felt the weight of defeat pressing heavier each day. Their armies were shattered, their fleets broken. They had charged into the fight with fire in their hearts, but that fire had burned too fast. Now, it was nothing but smoke. The enemy pressed harder, sensing victory was near. And in the middle of that despair, the humans stood steady. They were not loud, they were not proud, but they were unshaken. The others began to notice that wherever the humans stood, the lines did not break. The alien generals gathered in their war hall. Their armor cracked, their voices tired. They argued again, shouting over one another. Each blamed the other for the losses. Their pride still clung to them like chains, keeping them blind. But among the noise, one alien finally spoke a truth no one wanted to admit. "We thought ourselves the strongest," he said slowly, "but perhaps strength is not what we believed it to be." His words silenced the room. No one wanted to agree, but their eyes turned toward the humans waiting quietly at the edge of the hall. The truth was impossible to ignore anymore. That very night, the enemy launched their largest assault yet. Their ships blotted out the stars. Their soldiers poured onto the battlefield like a flood of fire. The strongest species panicked. Their leaders were cut down. Their formations crumbled. It seemed the war would end that night, and the galaxy's proudest warriors would fall forever. But in the chaos, the humans moved. Calm and sharp, they spread across the battlefield. Their orders quiet but exact. Where the aliens had scattered, humans drew lines. Where the aliens had fallen, humans filled the gaps. Slowly, order returned. Not because of the strongest species, but because of the humans. The turning point had arrived. The humans revealed tactics no one had seen before. They struck not with raw power, but with clever traps. They led the enemy into choke points, ambushed them from hidden angles, and broke their waves into smaller, weaker groups. The strongest species had tried to fight the enemy head-on, but the humans understood something. Deeper wars were not won by pride, but by patience and precision. Every human move seemed to cut through the enemy's fury like a blade through mist. The tide began to shift. The alien soldiers who had once mocked them now followed their lead. They copied human formations, copied their discipline. Slowly, the panic in their hearts turned into respect. They realized that humans did not sit in the back to hide, they sat in the back to see what others could not. And when they finally rose, it was like a shadow turning into a storm. For the first time since the war began, hope returned to the galaxy's strongest race. On the ground, one alien commander fought side by side with a human captain. The commander swung his blade with fury, but the human stopped him with a hand. "Not yet," the human said calmly. Seconds later, the enemy revealed an ambush exactly where the commander would have charged. Shock filled the alien's face. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice trembling. The human only replied, "Because I waited." The alien had no answer. He knew then that his people had never truly understood war. As the battles continued, the humans began to lead more openly. Their strategies saved fleets, their disciplines saved worlds. The galaxy's strongest species began to see themselves differently. They were no longer the leaders of the war. They were followers, learning lessons from the very race they had once mocked. The thought was bitter, but it was also humbling. They began to whisper among themselves. "Perhaps the humans were never behind us." One alien soldier murmured, "Perhaps we were the ones behind them all along." The words spread like fire through the ranks. The enemy, once unstoppable, now faced something new. They had fought species of pride before. They had fought species of brute strength. But they had never fought humans, not like this. The humans adapted to every trick, every trap. They turned the enemy's own fury against them. Where the strongest aliens had fallen, the humans stood, turning defeat into survival, and survival into victory. The enemy began to slow. Their endless charge began to break. The humans had found the cracks, and they were tearing them open, for the first time. The galaxy saw that the strongest race was not the one who shouted the loudest or fought the hardest. It was the one who saw, who learned, who waited, and then struck with precision. That was the human way. The others were beginning to understand. Sitting in the back was never about weakness. It was about watching, about patience, about seeing what the proud could not see. And now that truth was saving them all. The war was not over, but the direction had changed. The humans had taken control without ever claiming it. They had turned silence into strategy, patience into power. The strongest species, once full of arrogance, now bowed their heads in quiet respect. They knew that if humanity had not been there, the galaxy would already have fallen. The turning point had come, and it carried a lesson so sharp it cut through pride like a blade. The lesson was simple. Never mistake silence for fear, and never mistake the back for weakness. And so, on that night of fire and battle, the galaxy began to see humans not as shadows in the back, but as leaders who had chosen their place carefully. The stronger species had been shaken, and the enemy had been stopped. From that moment on, nothing would be the same again. The war had changed. Where once the strongest aliens had led with pride, now they followed humans with quiet respect. The galaxy whispered of the battles where humans turned defeat into victory. Soldiers who once laughed at them, now studied their every move. They began to see a truth that had been hidden for centuries. The backseat was not a place of fear. It was the throne of patience, and patience was more dangerous than pride. The enemy still fought fiercely. They struck with fire, their numbers endless, their rage unbroken, but something had shifted. When they faced the strongest aliens, they attacked without hesitation. When they saw human squads, they slowed, wary of traps they could not see. Fear had entered them. It was not fear of strength, but fear of precision. They knew the humans never wasted a step. Every move was a strike to the heart. The enemy, who had broken the galaxy's proudest, now hesitated before humanity. In the camps between battles, the alien soldiers spoke in hushed tones. "Why do they sit in the back?" one asked, his voice uncertain. Another replied, "Because, from there, they see the whole field." The whispers grew louder with every passing day. Stories spread how a single human unit had saved an entire flank, how their strategies had turned hopeless fights into survival. The proudest warriors of the galaxy, once unwilling to bow to anyone, now lowered their heads when humans passed. But respect was not the only thing growing. Fear also spread. For the strongest species began to wonder if humans had been hiding this strength all along. What else had they been hiding? If they sat in the back, by choice, what would happen when they chose the front? The thought unsettled them. Their pride was broken, but their minds were restless. They had thought themselves kings of the galaxy. But perhaps the true rulers had always been the quiet ones. They mocked. One alien commander finally voiced the question that many were afraid to ask. "Why did you let us lead for so long?" he asked a human officer after a battle. The human's answer was simple, yet heavy. "Because you needed to believe you were strong," he said. "And we needed time to learn." The commander's heart shook at those words. If humans had been learning all this time, then perhaps they were far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The enemy's largest strike came soon after. They poured across the skies with a fury that made even the strongest tremble. Entire worlds burned under their assault. The alien armies prepared to fight, but their fear was heavy. They looked to the humans, waiting for their orders. For the first time in the galaxy's history, the strongest species did not lead the charge. They stood behind, watching as humans stepped forward. The humans did not roar. They did not boast. They simply fought with their calm precision. They set traps across space, turned planets into shields, and broke the enemy's waves one piece at a time. It was not a glorious fight, but it was effective. The enemy, frustrated and desperate, began to falter. What they thought would be their final victory turned into their slow defeat, and the galaxy's strongest species saw with their own eyes that survival itself was following the humans. In the middle of one battle, an alien soldier cried out as humans pulled him to safety just before an enemy strike. "Why save me?" he asked, breathless. The human soldier only replied, "Because you are worth saving." The alien had no words. For all their pride, his people had never fought with such quiet loyalty. It was another lesson that struck deeper than any blade. Humans did not fight to prove power, they fought to protect. And that made them stronger than pride could ever be by the time the enemy retreated. The galaxy's strongest species knew the truth. They had once feared nothing. Now they feared humans not because of weapons, not because of numbers, but because of patience and wisdom. The back was no longer seen as weakness. It was the place where humans shaped victory. It was the place where they saw the world clearly, and when they finally moved forward, they carried the power of sight with them. Respect turned into reverence. The proudest aliens now walked quietly beside humans, knowing they had much to learn. Their pride was gone, replaced with humility, and in its place grew something new, a bond of trust. They no longer asked why humans sat in the back. They only asked what they would do next, for the lesson was carved into them like stone. Humans were not weak, they were waiting. And when they rose, the galaxy itself shifted. But even as the war tilted toward hope, one final question lingered in every alien heart. If humans could change the course of a war by rising from the back, what would happen when the war ended? Would they sit again in silence? Or would they finally take the front forever? It was a question without an answer, but it filled the strongest species with both fear and respect. They had learned the truth, but the lesson was not yet complete. The war was nearing its end, and with it, the galaxy's strongest species would face the final chapter of their greatest lesson. A lesson written not in pride, but in patience, not in boasting, but in silence. And in that silence, humans were already shaping the ending the galaxy would never forget. The last days of the war came with silence. The enemy had grown weaker, their endless waves slowing, their fury fading. But they were not finished yet. Everyone knew one final battle remained. It would decide not only the war, but also the future of the galaxy. The strongest species prepared, but their hearts were heavy. They no longer looked to their own leaders for guidance. Their eyes turned instead to the humans, waiting to see what they would do. The back seat was no longer a place of mockery. It was now a throne of quiet power. The humans studied the enemy carefully, as they always had. They saw patterns others missed. They saw weaknesses others ignored. They saw the truth that pride could never reveal, and when the time came, they stood not in the back, not in the shadows, but at the very front. The galaxy watched in silence as the humans finally walked forward, their calm faces lit by the glow of the battlefield. The strongest species followed, not with arrogance, but with trust. For the first time, the galaxy's proudest were not leading. They were being led. The enemy struck with everything they had left. Their ships filled the skies, their armies shook the ground. It was a storm, meant to end all resistance. The strongest aliens braced for despair, but the humans did not waver. They moved with quiet discipline, their strategies unfolding like a map no one else could see. Every enemy trap was countered. Every ambush was broken. The humans fought not with pride, but with patience sharpened into steel. The enemy's fury, once unstoppable, now cracked under the weight of human precision. In the middle of the chaos, an alien general fell to his knees beside a human commander. "We cannot match them," the general gasped, despair in his eyes. The human placed a hand on his shoulder and spoke calmly. "Then, do not try to match them, stand with us instead." The words carried no pride, no boast, only truth. The general rose again, his heart burning with a new kind of strength, not pride, but loyalty. For the first time, the strongest species fought not for themselves, but beside someone greater than them. Hours turned into days, and the final battle raged across the stars. The enemy pushed again and again, but each time, the humans turned their fury against them. Traps snapped shut, strategies unfolded, and patience carved victory out of chaos. The strongest species followed, copying their moves, learning their discipline. Slowly, the enemy's fury broke apart, until finally they had nothing left. The galaxy's deadliest war ended not with a roar of pride, but with the quiet precision of humans who had waited until the right moment. When silence returned, the galaxy stood in awe. Worlds burned, fleets were ruined, but humanity still stood. They had been mocked as shadows, called cowards, pushed to the back. Yet it was from the back that they had seen the truth of the war. It was from the back that they had turned patience into power. And it was by rising from the back that they had ended the war forever. The strongest species lowered their heads in respect. Their pride shattered. Their hearts changed. After the victory, the alien leaders gathered with the human commanders. One alien, his voice trembling, finally asked the question that had haunted them all. Why do you always sit in the back? Why hide your strength until the last moment? The human answered simply, his eyes calm. Because the front is where pride stands. The back is where vision waits. We do not sit there out of fear. We sit there to see. And when the time comes, we rise. The room fell silent, for the lesson was clear. It was a truth deeper than any weapon. From that day on, the galaxy remembered the war not as the war of the strongest, but as the war of the patient. They remembered that silence was not weakness, that waiting was not fear. They remembered that humans had taught them the greatest lesson, that strength is not in the roar of pride, but in the calm of patience. The strongest species, once rulers of the galaxy, became students. And their teachers were the very ones they had once mocked. In the years that followed, whenever the galaxy gathered, the humans still sat in the back, but no one laughed anymore. No one whispered about weakness. Instead, every eye turned to them with quiet respect, waiting, knowing that from the back came wisdom, and from wisdom came survival. The throne of patience had been revealed, and it belonged to humanity. The strongest species would never forget the lesson, because it was carved into their history with blood and silence. The war was over, but its echo remained. The galaxy's strongest had been humbled. The enemy had been defeated. And humans, the quiet watchers in the back, had risen to lead without ever asking for the throne. That was the final lesson, the one that shook the strongest alien race forever. Humans did not need to claim the front. They already owned the future.